OpenLine. If you're just joining us tonight, we're talking about state funding for public schools. As I mentioned in the open, even if you don't have a student in school, this impacts you because these are your tax dollars. But I imagine you know somebody in your life that is going through school right now, or maybe you know a teacher, or maybe you know an administrator. This impacts lots of different intersections of our lives. And our guest tonight is Jennifer Hill to help us navigate it all from the Nashville Public Education Foundation. Jennifer, we've talked a lot about how this formula works, but really it sounds like the impetus from the governor's office is they're wanting to focus more on how much should be spent per student. What should that look like in your eyes?
Yeah, so I think that when we think about spending per student, we need to think about the individual learners and what's best for a student and what supports will help them accomplish the aspirations and goals that they have. So, coming to a consensus around what an average learner in Tennessee looks like, and then being really thoughtful around what other types of students aren't the average students in Tennessee, and how do we make sure that they have the supports that they need to succeed, and thereby have the funding that the schools have the funding to provide that through. So really looking intently about who are our learners in our Tennessee schools, and what are their needs, and funding that accordingly.
And I imagine this is not something where you totally have to recreate the wheel. Are there certain states that are doing it better than others that might be a good model for Tennessee?
Yes, absolutely. There are some fantastic models out there, and it really, Tennessee is only one of 13 states that isn't currently using a student-based funding formula. So we could really pick and choose what we like about numerous examples throughout the country and bring that home to Tennessee and make it our own, and make sure it reflects the learners that are sitting in our classrooms today.
This is certainly not unique to Tennessee, but we have a wide disparity when it comes to counties that are well financed, like you might put Metro Davidson County into that column, versus you have more rural school systems, just even within the News Channel 5 viewing area. So how do you make a formula that is fair to everybody?
I think it's smart planning and good design, really understanding what the needs are, and not putting an undue burden on our less wealthy counties to contribute more than what they have a tax base to do. So it's going to be a really hard conversation to have, but there's no doubt some solutions that will be very fair for all different types of counties in Tennessee.
Absolutely. Just moments before we came on the air tonight, we got an email from the Tennessee Department of Education announcing that they have 18 education funding review subcommittees that they're setting up for this. I mean, that's a lot of committees. That's a lot of lawmakers divvied into different committees. I mean, does that say anything to you about how the state is approaching this, or what should we take away from that?
I think that that's a really great thing. A lot of opportunity for public engagement, for dialogue about what Tennesseans need and want from our school systems, and thereby from funding. It was encouraging to see the different perspectives that the department and governor are taking on this. You see an urban school district committee. You see a rural school district committee. You see suburban school districts. You have the needs of teachers and school leaders centered in those committees, as well as parents and students with disabilities and other things. So I think it's a really off to a really good start in gathering the type of feedback that I know Tennesseans have, and what they hope to see out of this funding change.
I want to make sure I ask you this, and I will give you the opt-out on this if you don't want to answer, but I'm curious. You often hear on Capitol Hill in Nashville, there's a little bit of a rivalry sometimes between more of the densely populated counties, between the more rural counties. Do you feel like, as someone that represents the Nashville Public Education Foundation, that you are getting a seat at the table and that lawmakers are listening?
yes, we have great representation here, and Tennessee is a diverse and complex state, and we wrestle with these type of decisions about rural versus larger cities all the time, and we can do this. We can come up with a funding formula that meets the needs of all of our counties, and that will fulfill the potential and the promise of all of our students.
Absolutely. Jennifer, we've been talking all night about how this is a complex system already. Changes would probably also be complex in keeping everybody happy and keeping it fair. Do you imagine, just from a legislative side, that this could take some time? Like, this is not, I don't imagine this is going to be something that just sails through both chambers. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm not a Capitol Hill expert, but the complexity that is embedded in a change like this, when this is the single largest state expense, could suggest that it would be a complex process, a complex deliberative process.
And are there any lessons learned from the fact that this isn't the first time that we've tried to make, adjustments to the formula? Is there movement, do you think, from what you've heard, that, maybe lawmakers will take some time to really make some more dramatic adjustments? Or, I know it's kind of hard to say. I know it's early in the process, but I guess from your perspective, is there a hope that this will be a deliberative process and that maybe some substantial changes are made?
Absolutely. We're cautiously optimistic. And if I'm reading the information from the governor's office correctly, it seems that they're interested in potentially exploring an approach that would not be amending the BEP specifically, but maybe creating a whole new funding formula that would be centered around student needs. So that's an approach that we haven't seen before.
Absolutely. So, when you're looking at different districts, obviously you by nature are Nashville focused. If we don't make adjustments to the formula, how do you think that will impact districts like MNPS?
I just think it makes our work a lot more challenging. I think the opportunity that we have right now to have this conversation as students are returning to schools from the pandemic, and we are more aware of the challenges and the needs of our students than we ever have before. I just think this is a tremendous moment to deeply engage in this and lean into the planning and design process about what we need from our schools, and thereby from school funding to secure the future of Tennessee.
Another thing to factor in, and I know that this isn't just directly pandemic related, but I feel like it's been exacerbated over the last few months. We have heard from district after district saying that they are struggling to be able to keep enough teachers in the classroom. The burnout rate is substantial when it comes to educators in Tennessee and across the country. Does salary and how much teachers are paid need to be a part of the conversation when we discuss how this formula is constructed?
Absolutely. Teachers are the single most important school-based advocate or impact or effect for student learning, and so absolutely this needs to be considered. And we have seen movement from Governor Lee on this in this past year when he allocated that additional 4% to teacher instructional salaries. The issue is that it doesn't become 4% to each teacher's paycheck because of the way that the formula is currently constructed. And so I would, love to see that when the governor and the legislature make a 4% investment in teacher salary, that 4% actually makes it to every teacher's paycheck.
And just to be clear, when often those things are announced and then implemented, where's a little bit of the disconnect? Why aren't those always making it all the way to teachers' bank accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question with a slightly complicated answer. So the formula allocates this very specific salary for teachers. I think it's $48,000 now with the increase from Governor Lee. And so once again, as we were talking earlier in the top of the hour, the number of teachers are allocated at a district level based on enrollment. So if there are more teachers that need to be hired in a specific district than what the funding formula generated salary for, then you have a gap that is not showing up in the teacher and in every single teacher's paycheck.
Absolutely. You and I were talking during the commercial break that, there's obviously quite a bit of a disparity too between how public schools and private schools, are funded and how much there is allocated per student, per teacher. Just what are some of the things that public districts have to make up for because they're not seeing, near the amount of funding per student based off of this formula and just by the nature of how everything works?
Yeah, so in Tennessee, the average per pupil expenditure is about $10,000. And here in Nashville, where I live, it's not uncommon for some private school tuition to be upwards of $25,000, $30,000. And what parents are paying for in that instance is a world-class education and all the amenities that I know that our public school parents hope for their students as well. And so it's just really important that we lean into this conversation and figure out, what does the public school experience in Tennessee look like? What do we want it to look like? And how do we get closer to that reality?
Absolutely. Certainly something to think about. A reminder, as always, if you have a question that you would like to ask, join the conversation. The phone number is right there on your screen. Think about it during the break. We've got to get to one really quick. We'll be right back after this.